Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 20th anniversary celebration extravaganza party celebrating 20 years of Hedwig and the Angry Inch. My name is Peppermint, and I know if you were anything like me, then you know exactly where you were the first time you ever heard of Hedwig and the Angry Inch. I was working as a makeup artist at the makeup counter during the day for MAC Cosmetics when Angry Inch, the lipstick, came out to celebrate the film. And at night, I was working at Don Hill's in drag as, you know, a superstar, a future superstar. And I had no idea that 20 years later, I'd be here sitting with the creators, the stars, and the luminaries of this very, very transformative story, piece of art, this cult classic. I was just beginning my gender journey myself, and I have so many people to thank, and they are all pretty much in this panel, so I want to jump right in. He is a Tony Award-winning American writer, director, performer, songwriter, singer, genius. He directed and starred and wrote with Stephen Trask the musical Hedwig and the Angry Inch and its subsequent film adaptation. Please welcome my friend, John Cameron Mitchell. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
Okay, and hold up. We have a Grammy Award nominated composer, musician, and lyricist who composed all the music and lyrics for the musical and the film. Please welcome Stephen Trask.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
John and Stephen, take us back to the very beginning. How did Hedwig even come about?
The short thing is we met on an airplane from LA to New York, I believe. Weirdly, we both had connections with New Line Cinema, who eventually made the film. Stephen was reading scripts for New Line. He had some family members who worked there. I had just done a film called Book of Love, directed by the head of New Line, Bob Shea. And we just started talking. There was when Harry Met Sally was on the screen, and we both were the only two people not watching it. He had a Fassbinder biography, which was on the seat between us, which was an icebreaker, which he's not usually breaking any ice, he's making ice. It was 3 years later when we kept bumping into each other, and I had an idea for a rock musical, and we saw each other's work. I saw his band Cheater at CBGB's, and he saw me in Hello Again at Lincoln Center, and we, you know, peanut butter, chocolate, we got to do something together.
So the Hedwig character wasn't really there. I think in the back of John's mind, he probably wanted to base a character on Helga, his babysitter. But when we started working, this character wasn't there. But I was basically doing a Hedwig style show with a rock band and drag queens at Squeezebox every Friday night, and I was the music director.
I knew The Origin of Love was going to be the central metaphor of the story. That was the first song. It comes from Plato. It was a story of us being cut in half and seeking our other halves. I gave Stephen the text from Plato, and he came back with that song whole. Nothing changed from that moment. It was just like this perfect first song. That's basically what we had.
And then, so John started telling me about Helga, and then I said, well, why don't we make Helga into a drag character? But she used to be a singer who used to perform with our rock star, who was the lead character. And John was like, what? You were a little reluctant to do it, and there was a little resistance to John doing it, but we just kind of poured everything into that first show, which was really a riot. I mean, it was just...
We really took our time in creating a 30-minute mini musical. Squeezebox was a magical place. And Peppermint, we actually met
at Don Hill's,
Don Hill's, which was the club where Squeezebox happened. And it was a legendary rock club. And Michael Schmidt, who was friends of Arianne Phillips, had this club. He just wanted a place he could hang out. We were all like, let's get a place where, you know, some rock and roll, drags, mostly queer, but everyone's welcome. You know, no bad behavior. This is a new thing for the early 90s. It was Stephen and my dream club.
It was a dream club for, I wouldn't say a lot of people, because a lot of gay men went into clubs, but it was for all the gay men who didn't like all of the other clubs. And this was exactly, and we just, this was the place that we wanted to be, and there was 1,000 of us every Friday night in this club, and it just
was so exciting.
It was like a home, and met friends that are friends forever.
And amazing drag performers who hadn't used their voices, they were used to lip syncing, suddenly found that they didn't have to sing like, you know, Patti LaBelle when they're singing rock and roll and punk, and they already were punk and didn't even know it. So you would get Mistress Formica, Sherry Vine, Lady Bunny, who suddenly she's singing Kate Bush and people are screaming like no one ever did for her. But we were both learning from these incredible innate performances. Even Pat Briggs, who did this character called Torment, and Jimmy James, who was used to doing Marilyn Monroe, but now it's Marilyn Monroe singing Stairway to Heaven.
Led Zeppelin, yeah.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And it was a ferment. And I was learning from the great, you know, Jane County, Justin Vivian Bond. These are legends of drag and trans rock that filled us up, taught us. And I was just a little baby drag queen.
Yeah, and I was learning, you know, I had to learn 4 or 5 different songs every week. It could be everything from the Buzzcocks to someone would want to do a punk version of a Barbra Streisand song, or a Depeche Mode song. It was just every week it was a new challenge musically, and it was a lot of growth for me as a musician.
It's funny, after our first gig, the scouts for Woodstock 94, the reboot of Woodstock, was there, and they were like, "You're amazing, we want you to perform at Woodstock." And I was like, "What?" I couldn't hear. I was like, "Wigstock, great. I love Wigstock." No, Woodstock. And I don't know what happened, but I think Squeezebox, the other queens were mad at me because I wasn't a real drag queen and I get the invitation to Woodstock. So I wanted a group of people from Squeezebox, but they couldn't find dressing rooms, you know, helicopters that demanded by Mistress Formica. So that never happened. But it was the beginning, it was the birth, and we kept doing gigs in clubs. We wanted to keep it out of the theater because the theater tended to tone everything down rock and roll wise. Right. And so we developed it eventually for the theater over 4 years at Westbeth, at the Palladium, at, you know, Fire Island, you know, porch parties where everyone walked away. We lived Hedwig's life. But then we finally, with the great help of Peter Askin, our amazing director, our first director and producer, we eventually landed in the Jane Street Theater, which he built for Hedwig because every theater in town rejected us. Public Theater, New York Theater Workshop, nobody wanted us. We were too weird, we were too drag, we were too punk. I was a fake drag queen, a fake rock singer, and a fake stand-up comedian, but it was still too much for them. So we had to build a theater for us to. And
it was so custom made that the height of the stage was set to the height of John in heels, and then people went and sat out where the audience would sit and said, well, "Let's make the stage a little higher." Like it was custom.
Yeah, we built it for Hedwig's wig. By that point, we had brought in Miriam Shor, who just blew us away in an unexpected audition as Yitzhak, Hedwig's lover and backup singer. And I had met Mike Potter at Kim's Video. He was one of the famously surly clerks at Kim's Video, who's like, "I can't rent you this. You haven't watched it yet? This is a classic. Fuck you, get out." You know, that whole thing. And I said, "I'm going to Squeezebox." He's like, "Oh, I go there." I was like, "I do wigs sometimes." I was like, "I need a wig done." And he did my second wig at the show, which was at Squeezebox, which was, Mike, what was it made out of?
Toilet paper rolls with hair wrapped around it, staples, and hot glue. And it fell apart on stage. Like the toilet paper rolls were dangling. I was like, "I'm fired." And then he was like, "Can we do that again? Can that happen every time?" And I was like, "No, that can't happen ever again." I mean, I was ready to walk out and be like, "Good luck with your character," because I knew I was fired, but I wasn't.
You've invoked Mike. So Mike, hello.
Hi.
Mike Potter is a hair and makeup artist extraordinaire who works in editorial, advertising, celebrity, and motion picture makeup. And he's also a painter, collaborating with John Cameron Mitchell. Potter created Hedwig's iconic wigs and makeup for the musical and film adaptation of Hedwig and the Angry Inch. So, Mike, we've invoked you, and we stopped at the toilet paper roll wig wrapped in hair that fell apart, hopefully at the right moment. I mean, it must have been the right moment if it was requested again.
It kind of didn't fall apart. Well, it started bad before that, because when we were standing at the bathroom door before he was going on stage in said toilet paper wig, he had a cup of tea in his hand, and someone
Coffee.
opened the door and the tea flew all over his face, hot tea. And it kind of like, it was like the first setting spray.
It was setting, yeah.
It was the first setting spray ever made. But then we moved forward. We were doing like Fez and places like that. And John wanted to go more structural. So I was making, if you can imagine, you know, the tubes that a dryer has, you know, those plastic metal, the big tube that's
the metal ones, yeah.
I have a picture of John because he decided he wanted to do a side part version where that wig is made out of those hair wrapped around that. And I just remember he snatched it and the wig flew off. You know, I mean, it was just a series of unfortunate disasters and events that kind of worked for the character over the years. But, you know, John was always, and Stephen always had these beautiful songs, and the singing and everything else kind of made up for it, and it became okay. The tragedy of the hair and makeup. Yeah, I mean, I've always said the only reason is Hedwig's hair and makeup is supposed to be kind of bad is the way that I was successful in that, the end of that process.
You failed beautifully. You know, RuPaul gets it right in terms of all the skills needed to do drag, meaning making your own stuff, design. You're a designer, you're an editor, you're a director, performer, sometimes a songwriter. Drag, and to a lesser extent, stand-up, is the most fully formed kind of performance in that you have to do it all. And oftentimes you're mixing your own damn song, putting your own track on. Right? I mean, I learned
hitting
about
play on the player, running to open the curtain, and then hurry up and get back into position for the audience.
Yes, and they're all like, "It's so glamorous," and you're like,
That gets to a thing, like a thing that we just sort of adapted. Hedwig always was wherever Hedwig was, and so then if something happened, it wasn't John and Stephen's performance where stuff was going bad. It was Hedwig and the Angry Inch's performance where stuff was going wrong, and that was the reality. And as long as you accepted that, it didn't matter. You know, we were out at the Jane Street Theater, like there would be leaks from the bathroom upstairs, and they'd have to bring
dead bodies,
and dead bodies, and pieces of the set would come crashing down on us. You know, hit the bass player, and he's like bleeding. And
we were in an SRO hotel, which means not standing room only, but single room occupancy, which is like welfare hotel. And it was like German backpackers and junkies upstairs. And once the audience was coming in, and they were taking a body out, and that was our gig. We were outside the theater system. I was such a theater queen, and Stephen was such a rock and roll queen. So we created a third space that was part theater, part cabaret, part rock, to keep the character honest. And then by the time we got to off-Broadway, we opened and nobody was interested. The critics really liked us, but audiences were horrified. Often very silent shows, like in the movie. It was only the press kind of making it hip. You know, it took Glenn Close coming 20 times.
And the press agents making sure that the press was always there when a celebrity showed up. And then they would pack the house with people with free seats. And they're like, this huge hit downtown that's sold out, and all these celebrities are coming. It's like, and the celebrities would go away and the press would leave, and we performed for like 20 people.
It was totally fake. But then it would be like Marilyn Manson and Barry Manilow are there one night. Elliott Smith and Madonna, Patti LuPone. You know, it was just like this mix was crazy. Pee-wee Herman, David Bowie, and B. Arthur, and Lou Reed,
and Laurie Anderson.
Pete Burns. It was out of control. We were overwhelmed that our heroes were here and approving of us. You know, and the drag legends too were approving of it, because I still felt like a fake like I hadn't paid my dues, as a drag person.
Mhm.
So even though we were limping along and never really a hit, we stuck it in there, and suddenly there was a bidding war for the film.
Okay, that is perfect timing. You've already invoked her, but I need to introduce her properly. She is an actor and activist who starred in film, theater, and television. And of course, she starred as Yitzhak in the off-Broadway musical Hedwig and the Angry Inch, and then later reprised the role in the film. Please help me welcome Miriam Shor. Hey, Miriam.
Hey, I'm so excited to be here. And thanks. It's so nice to meet you, Peppermint. I'm just a huge fan.
I know you're one of the people that I haven't actually met.
I know.
In person.
You're not over here kind of like sweating and fangirling. It's so great to be here. It's so fun to think back to all that time. I was just remembering, I can remember so vividly meeting Stephen and John. It was the first audition in New York City that a person ever sent me on. Was for the workshop.
Talk. What do you mean that a person ever sent you on?
So I met with an agent. I was just a kid, and I met with an agent, and they were like, "We don't know. Maybe we'll send you out on a few things. We'll see how you do." And the first thing they sent me on was to audition for a workshop version of Hedwig. It wasn't even fully a play yet. So I was like, oh, this is amazing. I mean, what is this? And I have a piece of paper that I wrote all the notes down on. They were like, I wrote Hedwig and the Angry Itch. And they were like, Yitzhak is a man played by a woman, former drag queen named Crystal Nacht. And they were like, you need to bring a song in. And,
what did you sing?
Well, here's the thing. And this is kind of magical. So when we did the workshop, the last song in the show was not Midnight Radio yet. It was John as Hedwig singing You Light Up My Life in German. And I have no idea why. I was not asked to, but to my audition, and I had never sung this song before, I don't know why, I sang You Light Up My Life.
Lies.
I swear to God.
For real?
No, I'm not lying. I don't know why. Why on earth would you pick that song?
I don't know. Wait, John, so were you at the audition, John?
Yeah. It must have stuck in my brain because, later that was sort of our temporary finale.
I feel like when I met John and Stephen and Peter, I just sort of was like, I kind of feel like I met my people and I kind of understand this person, even though he's not really a person yet. You were so good at kind of explaining his pain, but somehow I just tapped into that rage and that sadness that is Yitzhak, and it just felt weirdly familiar, and I just was excited to go on that trip. I didn't know, we had no idea at that point. We weren't off Broadway yet. It was still very new. And you guys were like, we don't really know if she can sing, but we kind of like her.
That and I take credit for that because we each had names written on our piece of paper and we like turned them over, like Peter and John. And Miriam was our first choice. And we're like, I don't know if she sings, but she just seems like one of us. We like her.
Miriam also taught me a weird thing that happens with actors. It's like, you can do things if your character can, that you can't in your life. And Miriam hadn't really sung rock and roll, but the character had to scream, rock and roll. And suddenly, because the character had to, she could. And I find the same thing with me. I can like catch a ball really easy if I'm in character, but in real life, I'm like, oh my God,
The world of musical theater I just always felt I always felt like I was trying to fit into that world because I just felt like I'm like clearly much more of a freak than is allowed in that world. And I just felt right at home when I met you and John Stephen. I just felt like, yeah.
An interesting thing with the flow of gender in the show, which is throughout, is originally that character was more of a factotum, someone helping out with props, and that was Craig Chester played the version of that named Georg. And when we were thinking of the real show, Stephen said, it'd be great if that character could be a backup singer, and I would love to hear high registered voice. So I was like, let's have a person born female with a high voice or available high notes playing a man who wants to dress as a woman. So in effect, an AFAB actor playing a man who wants to do drag. And it was the it was perfect for the piece because we want the audience throughout to be not confused, but like aware that the world is fluid. You know, we all have these energies that sometimes we call male and female in us, and we can pull them out when needed. Some others are more natural, but some are hidden. And if you don't let them come out, it's like an animal that dies in the wall. It can really stink the place up. And, you know, we were always aware of the flow. You know, Hedwig was a boy named Hansel who was comfortable in his gender and forced into assigned a gender by, in effect, the patriarchy, by his boyfriend and by the government, and is left alone and just, you know, crushed after that. And it's through drag that Peppermint reminded me is where the empowerment happens, not necessarily through a trans journey because it was more of a victimization, but taking what you've got, using drag, rock and roll, performance to find yourself, to create yourself as Hedwig is the journey. And a lot of people can relate to that. I get a lot, especially trans masculine people say, I love the flow of gender in this because as a trans masculine person, I want to be able to do female drag. I don't want to be limited by anyone. I want freedom. And Hedwig's journey to freedom is a danger, is a lot of obstacles, and hopefully there's fewer obstacles in real life for others. But the character allowed a little space that all kinds of people with different kinds of backgrounds and genders found the space to be within. And that's, we love that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say too, playing Yitzhak, it was such a gift to get to explore what being a man means, you know, to me as a person. I got to just explore that every night. And not just that, but what a man who wants to be a drag queen. So I got to really go on a journey that, you know, was not afforded people. You know, I mean, this is the 90s. That wasn't, I mean, it's still a struggle for a lot of people. And it felt like such a gift. It felt like the point was just to explore it and share it with everybody watching in that moment. You know, it was kind of extraordinary for all of us. I think we, and the audience, you could feel it. It was so visceral in the theater sometimes, you know, it was just really electric. And I remember when we thought that maybe it was going to be a movie too, which just seemed extraordinary because we were such underdogs for so long. Like we always joked like, oh yeah, we're going to be on Broadway and like 178th Street. Like, you know, it's never going to be on Broadway. Let's not kid ourselves. When they talked about, oh, you know, this could be a film, I remember thinking, but how are you going to translate that intersection of excitement and fear and transgression and acceptance, you know, that the play was able to do. So that was kind of an exciting journey. I mean, I was, like I said, it was my first freaking audition in New York. So I was like, oh, is this how art goes?
Miriam, you mentioned a bit of the journey from the workshop to off-Broadway to the movie. I'm guessing there were several challenges, but one of the big changes was, of course, with costumes. So I'd like to introduce this next person, who is one of the most unique and creative forces in the fashion and entertainment industries, a multidimensional artist, visual artist who brings her exemplary vision to film, fashion, theater, opera, music, and media. Oh, I love her so much. Please help me welcome Arianne Phillips. Hey, Arianne.
Thanks, Peppermint. So happy to be here.
I'd love to hear your experiences from once you first got on board. How did it begin?
It's very bittersweet that I came to Hedwig through our incredible production designer, Therese Dupre, who's not with us anymore, who we had worked on a project, a film together, and she recommended me to John. And I got the script for the movie, and I honestly didn't know what I was reading. I was like I don't know what the hell this is, but it's fucking genius. There was animation and puppets and, not your typical, camera angle, panning left, panning right, dolly moves. There is incredible character development. And I didn't hear the music because I hadn't seen the show. I had heard about it. I got the script, I read it. I just knew, I read it a couple of times because I really couldn't figure out which way was up or down, but I got the emotion and the heart. I trusted Trez implicitly. And then I went to, I think it was the Avalon Hotel. And I met Mike and
I was
John
in the pool
at the same time. Yeah, Mike, you were in the pool, the kidney state pool. Immediately, I can really echo what Miriam said, that I felt like these are my people, working in this industry. We are thrown together with so many different types of people. That's the brilliance, and different backgrounds, different aesthetics. And being a theater nerd as a kid, I immediately just felt seen in a way just by reading the script, and fell in love with John and Mike at the same time. And will forever be grateful to Trez de Prey for bringing me in, and for John taking a shot on me. And I went to New York shortly thereafter and saw the show on Jane Street. I think the first show I saw was with Ali Sheedy, actually. And I remember, John, you saying, you've got to see it, with someone else as well. So that was how I came to the film. And 20 years later, some of my family, closest, we've had the pleasure of going through this unprecedented journey. And Hedwig is always, how I explain it, Hedwig is my Rocky Horror Picture Show. When I saw Rocky Horror Picture Show as a kid, it was so provocative, and it was about a similar message in terms of, don't dream it, be it, finding your true identity, and using the artifice of, sparkles in hair and makeup to express yourself, and everything in between, and so much heart. And I feel so privileged to be part of this family, and it's a connection I have with strangers, whether they find me on the internet or hear about it on set. It's multi-generational. It crosses so many cultures and ages, and there's no boundary. And my grandmother, who isn't with us anymore, I remember when she saw the film, she was so blown away by it. And, and that's the power of beautiful story and compelling music and brilliant performance. And just doing this film has turned out to be the most representative of who I am as an artist in terms of my creativity. And I've just really felt that encouraged by everyone, John and Stephen and Frank's beautiful work, Mike endlessly, my costumes are completed by his work, and we're inspired by his work. And there's not a beginning and end like most projects. We all are so connected, and the performers. So that's my monologue.
Okay, this is perfect timing. It's time for me to bring in our next genius, who grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, right near where I grew up, and studied classical piano into his late teens. While learning Italian in Florence, Italy, he had the opportunity to work on a TV commercial there and was immediately drawn to filmmaking, and now works in features, TV shows, commercials, documentaries, industrials, webisodes, art films, music videos, you name it, he has done it. Of course, I'm talking about Frankie DeMarco. Okay, Frankie, please tell us how you came on board.
Yeah. I came through it through the Sundance Film Lab, through Michelle Satter, who was running Sundance Summer Directors Lab. Michelle was looking for DPs. I think she had already talked with John, and just based on the timbre of my voice and probably the timbre of John's voice, she thought these two probably get along pretty well. So I went and did the lab. And to Arianne's point about there's the standard way to shoot everything. And when we were doing the lab, I remember we had these sets that just were so overused. And I said, why don't we flip the set around so we're looking at the back of the set that has the exposed water. So we just kept on, I think, reading the script and seeing how John works, and he's willing to fail and try again and fail and try again. And that's always sort of been my mantra too, is I'm willing to fail, let's try it. And John encouraged that. And so we got along very well at the lab, and time passed. And then we ended up working at John's apartment, which John and I lived nearby at the time. And it would often, most of the time, be John and Therese Dupre, the production designer, and myself. And we went through the script page by page by page and picked the script apart and talked about things, threw ideas out. And John cherry picked the best ideas and made changes. And
John, how did the movie come about? And tell me about the challenges of being a first-time director.
Well, it was a strange situation. Like I mentioned, Stephen Trask had connections with New Line Cinema. So did I. Bob Shea, who ran New Line, was really my godfather with this. And Bob directed me in the show, in the movie Book of Love. And in my audition, I hadn't read the script till I got in the office. And he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "My character is really written very homophobically, Bob, I have to be honest." And this was like in '88, and people didn't really say those things. And he's like, "Well, it's homoerotic." I'm like, "Well, homogenous begins with homo as well. They all mean different things." So the characters are very, every negative stereotype. And he said, "Oh, I didn't think of that. So how would you do it if it was, rewritten?" And he eventually rewrote it. But years later, he came to the show on the behest of Mike DeLuca, and there were tears in his eyes after. And he said, "You were very straight with me in a creative, engaging way with Book of Love. And I appreciated that. And I'd like to help you. I'd like to finance this film." And they were supportive of me directing it and starring in it. It wouldn't happen now. It would have to be some big star, And suddenly we were the hot thing. So everyone would show up. Danny DeVito really wanted to produce it. Forrest Whitaker wanted to direct. I said to Forrest, "I actually would like to direct." He said, "John, that would be a terrible mistake." And I was like, "Forrest, I hardly know you."
Is that what she said, Forrest?
That's what she said. I mean, I hadn't directed before, so it was a bit of a risk. I directed on stage. So it was a strange moment when, independent film, it's not at it, it's not hip anymore. It's not part of the zeitgeist. It was in the 90s, in the 2000s. It was numbers of companies who were financing, and we had a bidding war amongst a number of companies. Even though we were not a big hit financially, we were a critical hit, and we had an opportunity. So we knew we really wanted to work with New Line, and eventually we brought in Killer Films, Christine Vachon, who's my hero, who worked with Todd Haynes and all of these great people. We also had a good year to work on it. So I went to the lab, met Frank, remember the first time I directed a scene on film, it didn't go that well. The second one, Michelle said to me, "You're a filmmaker now." And I started crying, and it was a beautiful experience. And I trusted Frank, even though he didn't have, the credits necessarily that New Line wanted. I had a great vibe with him, and I said no to all these more famous DPs. And that was the right decision, because Frank DeMarco and Andrew Marcus, the editor, in many ways were co-directors for me. They were much more experienced. Andrew had worked with Merchant Ivory, Room with a View, Howard's End, Remains of the Day. And Frank was this gutsy, scrappy New York-based guy coming up from the pit. And it was a perfect mix. And Stephen had these connections with New Line too. So there was a kind of family vibe with New Line where we felt safe.
Do you think that made you feel more safe to direct yourself? Because I think that sounds like the ultimate nightmare.
That was very scary. In some ways, doing the show, I was kind of directing myself then too, and never being able to see it because I was on stage. So I was used to kind of directing, but it was, and I knew what I loved, and I knew I loved Altman and Cassavetes and Bob Fosse, and all that jazz in some ways was the most influential on this, the idea that each scene could have, the fact that each scene could have a different style. And if there was a strong narrator, or that you could hold those different styles together. So it was films like that and Nashville that I was thinking about for this, a lot of 70s stuff. And I like the fact that even kids today can't tell when this was made. they're like 70s, 80s, it's like, it doesn't have that, it's out of time, which I like. And Frank and I made sure we shot it on film, and that was a big deal. So we had an unusual situation where we had financing, distribution before we even shot. And we had a good year to develop it and go through every scene. Frank and I, there would be no way we could shoot it if we didn't have that year. I didn't have enough experience. We bit off way more than we can chew. I'm often over there putting a wig on while Frank is shooting, the grips ass as a, substitute ass for myself. Right. And Andrew, the editor, is shooting gummy bears in close up. And I'm like, it's just like Squeeze Box. We're just barely getting it together. We organized what was called the insurgency. Arianne, Mike, and Frank stole costumes and makeup. Frank stole film stock, and had his own camera. And we shot some scenes in my apartment in Toronto on a weekend illegally, and shot, stuff without sound with Mike Pitt and me that ended up in the film. And we would never have got those things if we hadn't broken all the rules. Even the crew was overwhelmed with our rock and roll style. I remember the AD was he started crying, and we ended up having to assistant direct it too. I was like, move those trucks.
We had drag day, and all those Canadians, they wouldn't even take my help.
Ari, you and I were like the least drag out of all the AD showed up in like tutus.
You had these people who I think until this film would not have occurred to them to think about drag.
Teamsters and drag.
And it was a day where everyone was in drag, and that's how we shot that day.
That would be my ultimate thing. That's how I see the world. Everyone is in drag.
Put your frame of mind there to be a drag performer, even in the smallest way. Like, it just opens something for you. And if everyone on set is doing that, it's just going to open something up. And there was such a scrappy sense on that film, very much like what you were talking about, Stephen and John, when you were talking about being off-Broadway. The way that Hedwig was off-Broadway was not like we had to fake it. It was whatever happened was what happened. And being on that stage was reacting to whatever happened. I've never felt more alive in the moment of a theater piece. And that was very much translated to the screen. I was going to say we lost one of the locations, and then we just had to shoot that tire scene. Remember that? And it was like, that's right. That feels right for Hedwig, that you're scrappy and that you have to make do with what you have, and that it actually is beautiful. It becomes
the beauty of the piece too, is that it evolves around kind of the circumstance you're in that day when you're performing or shooting, and it lives on. It kind of, Hedwig has her own energy, and that's why it's authentic at any time. If you miss
Hedwig also only had 2 costumes in this original stage production, but in the film she had 41. So can you talk about that and how you would go from 2 to 41?
Well, the first thing I said to Ari, who, earlier work blew me away. I said, Ari, Hedwig's costumes have to be creative, unique, and affordable, because she is working out of thrift shops. And Ari is like, done. She brought in stuff from earlier movies she'd worked on or abandoned, or rock and roll music stylist stuff. I was wearing Britney Spears' skirt. I was wearing Cameron Diaz's shirt. It was like she was a hermit crab and a scavenger, right, Ari?
Well, yeah, I mean, what I would say, it's like method costuming, right? Like, getting into the character doesn't stop with the actors. It's really like, I always say that costumes are a beam me up suit for an actor to access a time and place in the character. And I take that seriously, like just unfortunately for John, I mean, it's like,
it was torturous.
It was torture. I mean, like, Mike Potter and I cutting the hairdress in, Mike and John crying literally on a Saturday in our hotel because
I shaved his eyebrows off.
Yeah.
Which still haven't recovered, except Revita brow peppermint. We all
Ari, remember when we went to the Valley and we went to the by the pound stores, and you got some really great, like that mall costume, like the Ricky Lee Jones, like pink with the beret. It was like Ari had all these great resources. It was like so like high. There was like a lot of
goodwill, bad will,
high low, but like a lot of low. But Ari's can always make it beautiful, like somehow.
John, you tasked me with that, and that is just the kind of meaning that I could put into those costumes, and it was doable and really like fun and ripping them apart and putting together as Hedwig would. And actually, I think that has informed me in my work ever since, to try and approach the costumes as if how a character dresses themselves, or what the character about in Hedwig was just riches and gifts that kept on giving.
Mike, can you tell us about her hair and her look in the movie? 30 wigs. That sounds like a fantasy and a nightmare all at the same time.
So I went in and the studio was like, well, we're going to have you oversee and you're not going to do John. Like, we have other people on, like union people. And I'm like, I'm the only person that's touching John. I didn't have an assistant. I had to do some of those wigs in triplicate. John never wanted to wear a bobby pin, so they would fly off his head and it would be like, cut, the wig flew off. But I just remember a lot of like Arianne teaching me. Like, it was my first movie I ever did was Hedwig. I think Arianne was really a guiding force for me, and John let us at a certain point kind of do what we wanted. And I did. I came from that old drag, Don Hill's world where, you threw together a bunch of, things. And, luckily Ari had things a little more planned out, but I just remember we had planned out wigs. Well, we had looks planned out, and then at the last minute they would just change. And or Ari would be like, this is all I got is this, and like these glitter shoes. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do a lip to match the shoes. Not that you would ever see them together, but we tried to connect. And I think having the freedom to be allowed to do what we wanted to do. And I come from kind of a little bit of a trashy background.
It comes from like Sharpie in your dark roots. That's you.
Yeah. I give all my like cred to Arianne. I mean, I always tell people, I'm like, she taught me everything I know about like working on a film.
Can we talk a little bit about the production designer, Therese Dupre?
Therese in some ways was, I mean, Ari too, but Therese in some ways had worked longer in film than any of us. And I knew her from the Killer Films days. She did a film called Dottie Gets Spanked with Todd Haynes. And, she was the hip New York person. She was 7 feet tall. She had the best taste in the world. Her apartment was just full of shit that was beautiful. Her wedding was the most designed wedding of all time. I sang Origin of Love. And she was pure, she was pure New York, cool, hip without the attitude, just sweetie. She came in and brought in Ari because they'd been working together. I brought in Mike and Frank, and Andrew was new to all of us. And Stephen, of course, was bringing in his musical people from different angles too. So a lot of people who didn't have film experience, but we had grand old Therese who did a very difficult shoot. I'm not sure how, it was like really hard on her physically.
She never slept. She never slept.
Magician.
She never slept. Every detail, Bilgewater's restaurant, the worst seafood restaurant in the world, with decorations of sinking ships on the wall. It was a sinking ship themed TGI Fridays.
Layers of story and detail, like the oven and the German apartment and the
oh my God, it was so much. It was more than we could afford. Not afford, more than we were worth. We had tons of references, so we were all in the same world when it was time to shoot. Because usually films, people don't work unless they're on the clock, and we were all working for nothing early on. Usually it's like 3 months before, right? And that's why things look half-assed these days. But this looked considered, thought through, fun, varied. And I was learning from them because I only knew what I liked. I didn't know exactly how to do anything.
I want to ask the whole panel about the movie and how cinematic it was, with like the bouncing ball animations and just like all the things that were done with the split screens that you couldn't do in the stage version. I'd like just free for all it.
No, I was just going to say, because we were shooting a live action movie, no longer a stage play on one single set with no set changes. And we had to work with an animator, Emily Hubley. We also had a lot of visual transitions because we would go from live action to animation back to live action. And we had to know, you have to film in such a way that this cuts together. So I think literally we had a year of free preparation, meeting at each other's apartments. It really helped because the movie has a ton of transitions. And I think it's part of the charm and the fun of the movie that go from East Berlin, suddenly, bang, we're into this next place or whatever, or animation or another new set.
That question I asked before, which I kept asking myself, which was like, how are we gonna translate this visceral energy of doing live theater way over on the West Side Highway when that was a place people were unsure of. It wasn't a cool, hip place. There was a sense of subversion and danger in that play. And we are all in it together. And I was like, how are you gonna translate that into a movie? How are we all gonna be on this ride together? How are we gonna feel like it's dangerous yet inclusive and subversive yet home? You know what I mean? Like, how is that gonna come together? And I feel like everyone put so much of themselves into it. When I watched it, I was like, oh, that's how you're gonna use everything you can use in film and throw out a rule book that tells you can't do that in film and make sure the glitter looks exactly right, which Frank would do with like, well, what film will make this glitter look perfect? Or, you know, this particular undergarment that no one will ever see, Arianne's gonna make perfect. That immediacy translated, and that alchemy that's in a stage piece that works was there in the movie. And it's so rare because it's almost unnameable, but I mean, it has to do with the heart and the work and the artistry that gets, you know, obsessively put into it.
And we were away from home. We were all in Toronto. We were in a different country. I don't know how many days we had, but we certainly didn't have enough days. That energy of getting it done and not losing a scene, you know, stuff like for me in post, seeing like, you know, John as Hedwig flying over bilge waters and Emily's animation and all those tasty, special vision is what created that other dimension of magic. And, you know, there is a magical reality in Hedwig that is grounded in this soulful heart story about being true to ourselves and the alchemy, exactly what you said, Miriam.
Do you guys remember, is the wig in the box, you know, Brady Bunch look, was that like one of the last scenes we shot? Do you guys, I think it was, and it was like we'd been up all night. We were laughing during that. We all got the giggles. You're in this heightened, we're so exhausted, like heightened reality of like having shot for so long. And then we're doing this absolutely fantastically absurd thing. Like you can see it in that shot if you're watching us that we're all barely holding on and keeping it together.
It's funny because when I wrote the original script, I didn't think budget, and Hedwig was performing in a lot of different places, like a airport lounge, you know, there was going to be a conveyor belt camera shot just discovering her, you know, in the airport lounge singing, and then a rest stop. And then Wig in a Box was going to end up in a garbage scow, you know, barge off of Staten Island with a helicopter shot. And, you know, Christine Vachon was like, what if it's the same restaurant, but a different branch every time? I'm like, all right. And then it was bilge waters, which was fun. And we used the same restaurant and different angles of it. So it's, again, you take what, you know, the hermit crab thing, you take what you got and then you gussy it up. And that is the spirit of drag.
But there was one thing about that, to me, like the greatest moment was what the wall of the trailer coming down. And when John and Therese and I were in pre-pro, we were talking. It was originally written as a daylight scene. I said, what if it were a nighttime scene? Does it matter if it's day or night? And John's like, no, it doesn't matter. That'd be okay. I said, well, this is such a spectacular, when the music changes and it opens up and goes crazy and they're shimmying and shagging. I said, can't we blow off the roof and then have all four walls fold down and it becomes this crazy stage or something? And Therese, you know, I don't deal with money. Therese deals with budget. And she's like, guys, we can't do that. And we're, oh, okay, fine. But then she said, you know what? I did a movie once where I had one wall come down. I can give you one wall. And then John's like, oh, we'll put footlights on the wall. And it just became the movie. And it was brilliant. That was, to me, one of the most charming moments. And then when we actually came to the day to film it, I was very worried about how am I going to film this as a cinematographer. And I remember like I was having panic the night before. How am I going to do this? This is a setup for failure. Then I put on the song. I had like one of those tape deck players in my hotel room in Toronto, and I put the song on. I listened to the song, and I realized, no problem, we're going to do this. So thank you,
An
Steve.
example of the rock and roll too is
Exactly. Yeah.
we're under a power pylon. You know, the trailer park's under one of those towers, and Frank is like, again, in the spirit of Squeeze Box, there's like two electrical grips, one with the light and one with a CD that's reflecting that arc lamp onto the pylons of the that's that crazy light on there. It's just a CD. No, it's crazy.
That was the money shot too, I think. Totally. That because that was when you had the like the full pullback, and I remember
we had the air dress, we had everything going.
The animation with the bouncing ball. I mean,
totally.
It's just
There's a lot going on.
Only the crazy, sick, twisted mind of John and Stephen.
So Stephen, I want to ask about shooting the musical numbers. I'm curious, how much, if any, did the score change for the film?
We just rocked harder. Everything about it just felt more aggressive than on the stage. It was more guitar heavy, a little more punk. And what was one of the things that was really fun for me, besides re-recording the songs and getting a different sound, was that actors all learned to play the instruments of the people that they were playing. So, I mean, obviously I was playing my own parts. Bob Mould was not in it. Ted Lazinski, who played bass on the recording, played the guitar player. And so Bob taught him how to play all the parts. And then the guy who played the bass player, Ted taught him how to play all the stuff. They came to the rehearsals, and Michael learned how to play the drum parts. He knew every drum part. The way that we did it on with all the musicians actually looking like they were playing the instruments, and then the monitors that they had next to them that looked like they were listening to them were actually playing their part out into the house. And so then we had this audience of extras who actually believed they were at a concert. So we were there doing it, and they were responding like they were at it, like they were seeing a band perform, and none of us were actually playing. But it gave that impression, and it felt very magical of when we did it.
Just really quickly, can everybody tell me your favorite moments or memories from the shoot and the film?
I would say Therese and I were next to the camera, and John was singing Origin of Love, and we both were crying by the time the song ended and holding each other. It was very sweet. Yeah.
Mine was every day at lunch, John would have to shave his face in full drag, and we would never know, like, was the makeup what was gonna happen? Because, we would shoot all the close-ups at the end, and it was always like 40 filters. But I just remember John every day at lunch, full drag, and directing in the chair, but he would just shave.
You can shave through makeup if it's an electric.
Yes, you can.
I have to say that last shoot, that last wig in a box moment with us singing the song, and it was the end of the shoot, and we sort of knew that, and it was this sort of really magical moment, and we were all just insane by the end of the night and the end of the shoot. That, and then also the moment where Hedwig gives Yitzhak the wig that we shot. That was just it's always an emotional moment for me, playing Yitzhak, but it was so beautiful the way that it was shot, the whiteness, the Therese, I mean, just the look of it in that moment, and then people catching me as I fell back, and then I got to be in drag. I felt like an alien angel, it was just Beautiful. This culmination. So it was a really meta moment where I felt like Yitzhak was getting a dream, and I was also getting a dream to sort of come true in that moment.
The one thing I just remembered, there is actually one song, which is Hedwig's Lament, which was the one time it felt like everything had stripped down, and John and I are both performing live. The piano is the piano that you hear is me playing whatever piano it was that happened. I don't even know if we tested that piano. It was not like the most awesome piano in the world, but it was perfect for that song. In that whole production where everything just kind of blew up into much larger proportions, and then just before it blew up, there was this one moment where zeroed in on just John and me performing live together, which somehow feels like really special to me.
I had a lot more fun directing other people than myself. I think in the moment during Tommy's Wicked Little Town, when Tommy's singing to Hedwig in this black void, and I was able to let go, and cry. It'd been so much tension. I don't think I had taken a shit for a month. I had an anal fissure.
Oh, ouch. Okay, I shouldn't have started laughing.
Hello, ouch. It was such a journey, harder than anything I will ever do, and before or since or in the future. Even though I didn't really want to act in it because I had done that, that was an opportunity to cry in a good way. Hedwig is crying for the boyfriend finally apologizing and letting her go, him being let go as well. And that's the beginning of forgiveness, because Hedwig is a victim, acts like a victim throughout. I'm a fucking victim, and is very mean to people because of it. I got hurt, therefore I'm going to hurt you. I'm justified in hurting, which is what so many people feel right now. Is like everyone is a professional victim. And I admire the people who create the professional alternatives. Yes, we know there are grievances. We know there's injustice. What are you going to do? Rather than saying you're hurting me or I hate you, you're canceled. It's like, how do we create the environment where we find the things in common, where we allow people to even change, But I really think Hedwig's story has resonated for more people than we expected, because we've all felt like a victim. And if you stay in that mode, even if you're the most powerful victim, you're still under the power of the person who hurt you. And you've got to find a way to forgive. And if they don't take the forgiveness, then you move on.
John, you said that Hedwig is not a trans story. And you talked a little bit about this, but can you go in a little bit on what Hedwig is about if it's not a trans story for people who might describe it as such?
Yeah, I really don't see it as, I don't think that's the best way to look at it. It is a story of this boy Hansel, who is in a lot of cages. There's the cage of East Germany. There's a place that is not welcoming to his very creative queer side. He is in a cage of masculinity that he feels there's more space for more femininity, whatever you want to call it. It's a person who is raped as a child, which is implied, raped by his father. There is abuse throughout. Ultimately, there is this operation that he's kind of forced into by his boyfriend and mother, and in fact, his government. To be free, you have to change your gender, and this is how we define your gender. No penis means you're a woman. What a horrible way to define femininity, is with a negative. And the inch being a metaphor for what is left of that abuse. What is the scar, the remnant of these people having hurt him? And when he does end up in a trailer in Kansas alone, abandoned by that man who in effect mutilated him without much consensual choice, not allowing him, as Stephen said, to go on his own gender journey, but forcing it. That's an example of top down forcing people into these narrow places they didn't expect to be. We all end up in these narrow places, and we've all had some bruises and hopefully not as horrible wounds that Hedwig has experienced. And then there's the next step, which Peppermint, you identified as self-creation to me, which is like, in effect, in drag, which is a tool that anyone can use, straight, cis, queer, trans, can use drag in a special way to defend yourself with armor, but also to create a canvas to express yourself safely. That is when Hedwig puts on the makeup, finds that wig, and makes something beautiful and new, which is more than a man and a woman. It is a gender of one. And so that's why I don't think, it's a trans in the terms of crossing boundaries, yes, but not necessarily the traditional definition of transgender, which is I'm finding myself through agency, through volition, through sometimes physical changes, sometimes just identification. But the deeper elements of finding yourself through the woods, through the abuse, is one that trans friends have told me they found use in Hedwig. Cis friends, queer friends, gay friends, straight folks, outsiders, all. And to limit the character being played by one category or another goes against its actual message, which is self-realization and finding your own wholeness. In the end, Hedwig doesn't even need the tool of drag anymore, and in horror and frustration tears it off and walks into the world naked, you know, with a scar, saying, take me as I am, or don't take me at all. I no longer need this defense. And I see Hedwig now as probably a non-binary professor of German philosophy and rock and roll in a small Midwestern college, about to lose her job and healthcare.
I will take that course anytime. I want to ask each of you about the enduring legacy of Hedwig, and when you became aware that Hedwig had become such a cult classic.
I think the first time I knew it was a cult hit when Michael, who's my husband, got a job at the University of Kentucky in 2004. I started going to clubs. I met this guy, Dwayne Lundy, who owned a recording studio in town, and he was working with a band called Parlor Boys. And I met him at one of their shows, and he was recording them. And he was already a huge Hedwig fan. Then I started hanging out with the band, and I became friends with them. And everyone in their circle of friends who are like just very creative and very like progressive millennials, and they all knew the movie, and they'd all watched it in high school. Everybody knew it, and they were all big fans. And like, and I remember and then I started going to clubs to hear bands, and I'd meet people at the clubs, like, and they're always like 24, and they'd be like, oh my God, I'm such a huge fan. And and then we were in Lexington, Kentucky, and I was like, I didn't have any clue that was going on in the country as a whole.
For me, the legacy personally is that Hedwig changed the trajectory of my choices that I've made in my career and in my artistic life, and it recalibrated who I went into blindly pursuing, and so I'm forever grateful for that. And on the larger level, it has fostered a conversation that I have with strangers about meaning and purpose and joy and celebration and pride in so many different forms, and a connection to strangers. And then the physical legacy is that it was the only film I ever owned the costumes for, which was a deal I made with Christine Vachon and Katie Rimmel, the producers, because they couldn't pay me enough money. I said, okay, I'm keeping the costumes. And I have donated almost all the costumes to the Ampus Museum. So they have a permanent home. I've donated all my sketches and will live on. And hopefully that physical legacy, people will get to enjoy the costumes in future exhibitions. And so I'm super grateful for that.
I keep meeting people every day who, you know, were affected by Hedwig here in Brisbane. You know, even I was trying to get my rent stabilized apartment form notarized here in Brisbane, and the secretary is like, you know, you have the same name as, you know, an actor on Broadway. Have you heard of Hedwig and the Angry Inch? And I'm like, that's me. And she's like, no, right. So it filters not in a massive, you know, kind of shoved down your throat by marketing, you know, Marvel Universe way. It bubbles up from the bottom. You know, it's passed on word of mouth. A person gives it to a friend, the DVD or what, you know, now it's just the streaming. Like, people, I've heard of multiple people saying, when I start dating someone, I have shown the film to them. And if they don't like it, we don't continue dating.
Oh,
You know, I love being a dating litmus test. And it, you know, and it kind of resonates again throughout sexualities, ages, genders, race. You know, there's a sense of understanding when you've been knocked down and you're trying to put yourself back together, find your wholeness, find that other half, even if it's an internal other half. And it's found its way. The countries that have welcomed it most, Korea, Japan, Spain, Australia, France, you know, these are places we didn't expect to resonate with something unusual, you know, because Korea and Japan aren't super queer, you know, relaxed places, but the story itself, especially Korea, where it's, you know, I'm actually a rock star in Korea. You know, Stephen and I can go there and perform to 10,000 people in one night, and K-pop stars show up and they're like, "We love Hedwig," and partly is, you know, their flag is the yin yang symbol, which is similar to our Hedwig symbol. You know, this is a broken nation, just like Germany was broken. So the queer stuff aside, we get so many people resonating to different parts of the story, which is so gratifying to us. And the people I've met just because of this project are some of my favorite people. It keeps giving. When I meet, you know, a trans kid in Sydney who's just coming up and saying, you know, you gave me a little bit of hope that there was some space for me to make myself, not make myself in the image of Hedwig or you, but make my own journey. That is the most empowering compliment any artist can have, is that it made someone feel that they could do something they didn't know they could, that has helped them.
I think that it's a piece of art about identity, about national identity, right? It's one of the only pieces of American art I know of that deals with the Berlin Wall falling. And the Berlin Wall was this moment of identity for everyone. People all over the world identified who they were as nations based on which side of the wall they were on, you know, and we sort of forget that now because it's gone. It just dissipated and disappeared, but it was how people define themselves as nations.
Binary.
Yeah, and that same split, this idea that you could, so unnatural to split something and say, pick a side. You cannot go, there's a no man's land in between. You don't get to go over it, or you'll die, you know? That kind of feeling of like searching for identity, it was so beautifully put into this piece that was like, you know, East, West Germany, but also male, female, yin, yang. And who are you in that world? Where do you exist? When do you get to make that decision? And I feel like Hedwig asked that question with music, which is the most visceral way to ask a question, you know, and people just responded to it because it asked that question of you when you watch it. And some people, maybe it felt like the first time they were allowed to answer.
In the last 20 years, John, since the movie was released, what would Hedwig think?
Hedwig was like, "Where's my money?" Hedwig is,
Exactly.
I'm playing Joe Exotic right now, and there's a lot in common with Hedwig, right? Sudden fame, you know, jealousy, anger, young boyfriends.
You know, before the pandemic, I would have not understood that, but now I totally get it.
Yes. What do you think, Stephen? What would Hedwig be doing now?
I think that I think she thinks there's too many walls, not enough bridges.
That's right.
You find the point of connection between you and another person, another group, and you can make it into a wall or you can make it into a bridge, and Hedwig would prefer to make it into a bridge.
Okay, so I want to say thank you to each of you for spending time. I want to say thank you to everyone watching, and of course, I want to say thank you to the Academy, which I've always wanted to say. I have no business saying it, but I'm going to say it now. John, Stephen, Arianne, Mike, Miriam, Frankie, thank you so much. Congratulations to each of you and to everyone that had anything to do with this film, with the off-Broadway, with the workshop, with the West End, with the Broadway production, any iteration, and of course, the many, many people who have the fortune to work on and be associated with or any of the subsequent productions that have been on stage thereafter. Congratulations to 20 years. And thank you so
Thank
much
you.
on behalf of so many people who are gender expansive, gender explorative, and beyond. Here,
Thank
here.
you,
Thank
Peppermint.
you.
We love you.
Thank you, Peppermint. Thank you,
Thank
the Academy.
you.
I love you. I'll talk. All right,
Love
guys.
you.
Love you. I'll talk to you
Love you.
guys
Thank
soon.
you all.